Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AI Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our quick publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AI Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AI Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Hello and welcome to the Minefield podcast from Anfield Index Pro. I am your host, Alan O'Donoghue, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host extraordinaire, Dr. Andrew Vincent. Dr. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm excited for another episode of World Cup Ethics Ramble.
Yeah, this one should be an interesting one, and we've had some really good feedback from our previous ones. So I think people have found it interesting to try and digest the World Cup and the ethics around it from different perspectives, which is what we wanted to do the whole way through. And today we wanted to kind of follow on from our last one, where we looked at whether we'd be watching or not watching, and look at some of the more prominent headlines that have come out from this World Cup in relation to the ethical side of things. So, Andrew, have you been watching the World Cup?
Yes. Not quite as much as I usually would, but, you know, part of that I think is also just about like life phase and the timing of games and like a lot of them taking place during the workday. But yeah, I've been tuned in. You know, part of your prediction from our last pod was true, which is just like, you know, once you start watching, there's going to be an extent to which some of the stuff we've been talking about just kind of fades into the background. The games are just the games. I think, you know, that's partially true. Like, you know, it's also in the forefront of my mind, like everything else that's gone on, and looking at the stadiums, it's like, the American commentary is like especially bad. I don't know if you remember Landon Donovan for his like, brief stint in the Premier League, but like he is one of the hardest people to listen to.
Okay,
maybe anywhere. But I've actually had to watch most of the World Cup in Spanish because I don't get the streaming service that does the English commentary. So I've dodged him for the most part. But my brother was saying that there was a game where he was watching, Landon Donovan was commentating, and Landon Donovan was like, wow, whoever designed and built these stadiums really did like a wonderful job. And it was just like, oh my God. Jesus. So, and he tried to backtrack. It was like, later he kind of realized, but like, it was just like, oh my God. So, yes, a lot of that does fade into the background and people forget quickly what the background of it is, but also, you know, try to keep that stuff in the forefront. And there's been plenty going on that's kept some of the ethical concerns on the forefront. And I think there's also just a reality for me that like this World Cup has like not been the same as the others.
And I do think the timing aspect of it being when it is probably is having an impact as well. We were in the middle of a season. We're still in the middle of a season and there's a World Cup going on. I haven't been watching, and before we came live, I was explaining to you that it has been really easy to not engage with it. I've been surprised. I honestly thought I would struggle. I did wonder, would I give in to I love football and I just want to watch the football, and I haven't at all. I haven't even had a thought. Like I have an office from my parents' house that I work out of. My dad's watching it, and even when I walk in and he's watching the match, I'm not engaged in it at all. And that has been quite freeing, actually. And I'm so detached from it that I actually have no idea what's going on. I heard Germany and Spain, I think, both got knocked out. That is pretty much all I've heard. And
yeah, it looks like the USA is going to win.
Oh, really? Well, I don't know. Are you still in it?
Had you heard that? No.
Okay. Yeah. See, that genuinely, I have no idea. And,
No, we're out.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not missing it at all. And, it's been nice to be able to stick to the principle of, for me, it was an important enough process to not engage with it at all.
I think in retrospect, you were right.
In what way?
I think there's probably something more rewarding about sticking to your principles than watching this particular World Cup. And maybe any World Cup.
Yeah. It's just, a sense of nothing, just a total disconnect. Not nothing. I'm living life. Like I'm paying attention to, I'm going kicking a ball about with my kids, or doing something else instead, and it's been lovely. Whereas normally we would be all sitting down and stuck in front of the TV watching the match. So, it's nice from that respect.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, like ultimately one of the driving factors for me deciding to watch had been, just some of my best friends, especially with this, like American Thanksgiving, like everyone was in town for a couple of the USA matches, and like being able to watch with them, like we did when we were like 15, 16 or however old we were during like that 2006 World Cup. It was just like, we may never get a chance to do this again.
Yeah.
Like that's just the reality. And like, that part of it just means so much to me that it was like, I'm going to tune in. I enjoyed following the US through this, and like not as much as I did when I was 15 or 16, but like I did enjoy that part. And then, my interest has fizzled a little bit, but I think, your comment brings up something really interesting. And we had someone in the Discord chat had sort of just mentioned like how there's like like once you're out, like not out of the World Cup, but like once you sort of disconnect from something, like it's sometimes amazing how little it matters.
Yeah.
Which is weird because like of how much it matters when you're following it and in it and watching it.
Mm-hmm.
But like sport is like that because it's so unimportant. And then like it matters so much. But it's all about your perspective and how engaged you are and how much you're focusing on it and following it. But like, it can be such a light switch of whether it actually matters to you or not. And like it's weird. There's not a lot of things in life like that.
There isn't, and it is interesting. And like I think we've probably discussed in the past, I certainly used to be a lot more impacted by, say, Liverpool's results not going the way I hoped. But I would have friends, who still, like in their 40s, would be grumpy for the week, and they justify it. That they will go to work and be a pain in the ass, and they'll be with their partners or their children and they'll be a pain in the ass. And it's like, well, it's okay for me to be this way because Liverpool ruined my week with the result. And that's such an interesting perspective when we take a step back and go, it's a game of football that we have no control over. Zero control over. And it can make us justify being a dickhead to our colleagues or our family.
Are you that person who has everything? The coolest merch and those must-have fan threads? Well, over at our Anfield Index shop, we've gone that extra mile when it comes to pimping up your Liverpool collection. From our popular range of bespoke design t-shirts, sweaters, hoodies and hats, to our signature edition mugs, prints and coasters, all provided with fast worldwide shipping. We have something for every red. We also stock official LFC merchandise and are licensed with the Premier League and UEFA to sell official iron-on shirt badges and sleeve patches. As a listener to this podcast, you can get 10% off everything with coupon code AIPRO10. Just head over to AnfieldIndex.shop or find us on Etsy by searching for Anfield Index.
That's just crazy.
Yeah. So sometimes I think about the game of Monopoly, which is America's game of capitalism and dominance and pushing everyone out so you have all the money, which I believe we've shared with the world. Is that an international
Absolutely
game?
it is. think we've got 4 versions of it at home.
We have, yeah, there are a lot of versions. There's a lot that you can buy and own and put other people out of. So why limit it to one version? You can. Anyway, sometimes I think about it, and like one of my working theories on the game of Monopoly is that if you're playing with 6 people, ultimately you want to be the 3rd or 4th one out. Because if you're the 1st or 2nd one out, like there's still a group of people playing and they're having fun. It's sort of like, shit, I did really badly. But if you're one of the last 2 people in, everyone else is somewhere else having fun. The game's gone on for too long, and you're probably pissed at the person you're playing again. It's like not worth the stress, but like it's amazing to be the 2nd or 3rd person out and watch this game unfold and how much those people still care. And to have been in this experience of like, I cared about this so much 15 minutes ago. And if I were one of those 2 people, I would still care about it a lot. But right now, like, I am so happy to be doing something else. And it's like amazing with like any sort of game, and sports are just a game too. Like once you disconnect from like this pretend set of rules that is dictating this game, like, your life isn't worse.
Mm. Yeah. And I think maybe this is something for another pod in the future around, and I know we've done kind of fan behavior in the past and touched on it, but the things that we will say and do in relation to football or sports relative to the real world is fascinating to me. The behaviors and permissions we give ourselves when it comes to what we can say or what we can do are legitimized because it's sports, that if we were to do it in any normal circumstance, it's like the driving a car. People who get really angry in a car and someone cuts in front of them and they're like, I fucking hate you, I'd kill you. And then we transport that onto the footpath and we walk past each other, nearly bump into each other. And what we actually do is, oh, excuse me, bit of a laugh. But could you imagine turning around and going, fucking get out of the fucking way, you fucking prick, I fucking hate you. Like,
there's a rail trail, like a footpath. I've never called it that, but I'd assume that's what it is. It's a footpath right behind my office, and that's how I behave out there. If someone's fucking with me, man, I'm getting into them. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I believe you. While you're robbing grannies.
That's right.
But yeah, that's definitely a pod I'd like to come back to, and maybe we'll get some. Maybe we'll see who else might be interested in coming and joining us for that one. There might be a few listeners.
Also, anyone who's still listening right now to this, we've covered Monopoly. I said World Cup ethics ramble, and I hadn't expected to emphasize ramble so heavily immediately.
There you go. But that just shows how in flow we are, Andrew, that we just go where it takes us.
That's true.
And I suppose returning to that, like I did notice today, one of the headlines on The Athletic, I didn't read the article, was that another migrant worker died while doing repairs in one of the stadiums. And I do want to ask you about the lovely is Gianni Infantino, and the struggles that he has faced in his life and the challenges he's faced in his life, and how it makes him feel like a migrant worker or someone who is LGBTQ plus. So for those who haven't heard about those comments, Andrew, could you let us know just a snapshot of some of the things he said in relation to this?
Probably one of the most tone-deaf and ill-informed speeches. I mean, like, I won't say ever.
Yeah, Mussolini and Hitler had a couple of bad ones, but...
yeah, they knew what they were saying now. Like, he thought, I think, that he was saying something good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah, so... for those who aren't aware, like the speech we're talking about is, today I feel like a migrant worker. Today I feel like an LGBT person. I don't know how he put that, but I don't think it was that. Like, today I feel like, I don't know. But basically, like, went through all of these oppressed groups who in different ways have been negatively affected by the World Cup and just said, you know, today I feel like each of these people, and explained that he has a history of oppression, having been a red-headed Italian. I don't know a lot about Italy or the politics, but I don't know that there's any red-headed Italians being kidnapped and imprisoned for months at a time.
Because they have red hair.
Because they have red hair, right. Specifically because they have red hair. So, you know, certainly I'm positive that could have been hard. I'm positive that there could have been bullying, but that's a really, really different from the kinds of experiences that he's purporting to talk about there. So, you know, that's the big one, and it's just ignorance, you know, and maybe intentional ignorance. I don't really know. You know, I think that's an argument that exists to downplay experiences of people that have actually experienced depression, is like, oh, we're all just people and we've all gone through hard things. And so it's sort of this, you know, yeah, I get you, and like, let's just watch soccer together because it's nice to enjoy ourselves. And that's kind of been the main theme, right? Is like, people need this, and people need this to enjoy ourselves. So let's not worry about it too much. We've all been through some stuff. Like, this is a way for us to connect and enjoy and learn about a new culture. So that was kind of the gist of the speech as far as I understood it. And maybe someone watched it more closely or knows more and, you know, can fill in any gaps that I'm leaving there. But as far as the start to the World Cup goes, it's like, yeah, we don't give a fuck about all this stuff.
Yeah, that's literally what I was about to say. When I heard or saw the headlines and the comments, that was what came to me. He, intentionally or unintentionally, is saying, I don't give a shit about all these complaints, and you shouldn't either, because football.
Hello, I'm here to annoy you. I'm here to annoy you into listening to more of me and more of others on EPL Index. We don't just have the Anfield Index stuff. We've got EPL Index as well, which covers the entirety of the Premier League. And we have 3 podcasts and a whole bunch of really good writing on EPLindex.com. The podcasts are my own Two-Footed podcast, which is every day at 4 p.m, Monday through Friday, covering the whole league. We have A Tad Predictable, hosted by Tadiwa. You know Tadiwa, he does Anfield Index. He presents A Tad Predictable before every Premier League match week. And then Kevin DeVries and his crew on the EPL Roundtable, they're every week after the Premier League match week. So make sure you listen to everything we're doing on EPL Index and follow us there on Twitter at EPL Index. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, and in this way that's like, come on, stop being a pain about it.
Yeah, stop complaining about it.
And it really puts it problematizes the people who are speaking out as being the issue.
Yeah.
Instead of all of these, you know, different structures of oppression and the way the World Cup has contributed to those and made use of those.
Mm. And it's interesting that this is coming to me. I remember the very first time that the Hillsborough inquiries actually, when they showed that, you know, the police were at fault, a group that I'm in, like a WhatsApp group that I'm in with friends, has a few Man United fans in there and whatever, and so we would always have that a little bit of banter or whatever, you know. And he hates Liverpool. I significantly did like Manchester United or whatever, but he said maybe this will now shut the Liverpool the bleating Liverpool fans up, right? And literally everybody in the group was like, that is fucking bang out of order. Like, even the other United fans were going, I do not agree with what he's just saying. That was just horrendous, because they could see the bigger picture. And I think it probably feeds back into what we were talking about at the very start about the fan behaviour. And my response was, I hope you never take your kids to a football match and you or they don't come home because you just went to a football match. And in fairness to him, he turned around, he apologised, and I was like, I don't need an apology. But, you know, you have to start to look beyond the tribalism of football and see that this is about a much, much bigger thing than just football. And that's exactly what Infantino tried to do with those comments, was to diminish the actual reality of the impact of the World Cup taking place in Qatar, to just, can we stop this complaining and bitching and moaning now, because the real important stuff is actually starting to take place.
Yep. And like, you know, one of two things is true. Like, either he's never listened to the stories or really heard or really like allowed himself to empathize in a way where like tried to relate and tried to understand the experience of someone who didn't have a loved one come home because, you know, they went to work on the World Cup sites and died during the construction, or, you know, had a loved one who was kidnapped, or themselves were like taken and held by the state. And so, you know, either you've never actually explored those experiences and you haven't done the work to educate yourself about the impact that you're having on this, like, where the World Cup and what you're a part of. And, you know, that's totally possible. Or he knows about it and just chosen to ignore it and relay this other message. And neither of those are good.
No, and it doesn't set a positive precedent for future World Cups or future interactions in terms of the accountability for countries in terms of human rights and that kind of thing going forward. So although they might say that, well, going forward now you have to meet certain criteria, how much is that going to be taken on board? I don't know.
Which actually moves us nicely into our next kind of area, because like it's not. And like there's, you know, what happened like in the week before the World Cup started and the week after it started is all of these things that were promised were just changed. And so it's like, you know, from things like, okay, selling beer around or near the stadiums or just in general, like I'm not super upset about that as a change, but just the fact that this was said, oh, this will be fine, and then it was changed, or Welsh hats being confiscated, or, you know, signs being confiscated that had, you know, pro-LGBT messages or other like kinds of messages of protest, you know, things that were said, oh, these will be fine, expressions of this will be fine, this will be allowed, this will, like, basically, like it, and maybe I wasn't paying a ton of attention to the policy in the lead up, but like my impression was like, hey, we're going to allow for this discourse to take place. Like, you know, it's not how we personally do things in Qatar, but like, you know, we're going to allow for, like people to express themselves essentially. And then it's like, right before it happens, like, no, we're not.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no reaction to that at all, other than being like, okay, let's keep playing.
Yeah. And I think, you know, one of the saddest things for me was seeing the captains not follow through on their commitments. And I know initially when the stuff came out, the talk was, well, you'll get a yellow card. And a lot of people were going, just take the fucking yellow card. Do you know what I mean? Your position is more important. But then I believe it's come out subsequently that there was unlimited restriction on fines and retribution from FIFA had countries actually won the armband. I still think they should have done it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's true or not, right? So, but that's what I've been told. Again, I haven't been kind of paying much attention, but if that is the case, FIFA can't operate without the clubs or without the countries participating. There is no World Cup. Like if they were to ban England and ban Germany and ban France and ban Argentina and ban Brazil from the next World Cup, they ain't getting anywhere near as much money. They ain't getting anywhere near as much TV revenue. They ain't getting anything. But I think the the countries, as in the FAs in the countries, showed that they were willing to back down from a simple gesture. And it's just disappointing.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I think like I have some empathy for, you know, the young men having to make those decisions on short notice and suddenly being in the spotlight. And like, for that to suddenly be a personal decision where you have your whole team, you have all sorts of people counting on you in different ways. You know, this is something that was meant to be sort of like a career, like a highlight of your career, is being able to participate in this. And, you know, like, I think in a very calculated way, this was done last minute.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, on the one hand, like, I think there were conversations ahead of this, like, you know, I'd read somewhere that, like, basically there's always been a rule in effect of not wearing, like, approved equipment can lead to a yellow card, essentially. And so, like, you know, the argument was, oh, well, these players should have known ahead of time, like, to say that this is like a sudden change and someone's pulling the wool over their eyes, and you know, that this is a short last minute decision, like, isn't fair. Like, they knew this, and for them to back out now and be like, hey, well, we're getting this, like, isn't like a fair characterization of what's really happened. But, like, I think that's the captain's experience of it. Like, you know, whether there was a rule in effect or not, or whether this was always sort of behind the scenes, something that was going to be cracked down on, like, I don't think a lot of those captains knew it. So, yeah, like, I think it's a really, really difficult position to be put in. You know, I like to think, or I like to hope, that if I was in that position, I would have worn the armband. But also, I watched the World Cup, so I don't know. And, like, you know, and, like, I think Klopp's argument, too, that, like, who we have expectations for and how and when is, like, an important thing to consider. But I also think it takes individuals being brave and stepping up and facing consequences to make change. And so, like, is it a fair thing to have put on their shoulders? Maybe not. But does that change the fact that it is on their shoulders? Like, I'm not sure. And, like, I think in some ways to say, well, look, like, these guys are just there to play soccer, and, like, they should be allowed to just do that and give them a break, starts to feel really similar to that argument we didn't like from Infantino, and starts to feel really similar to, like, okay, like, quit your complaining, leave these people alone, we're just here to enjoy the game. And it's like, how do we do all those things at once, and can we do all those different things at once? And maybe not really. Yeah.
And I absolutely take on board what you're saying, and I hear it. And I think, you know, like Klopp was saying about it's not fair to put that responsibility on players. They're grown men. And the only retribution to them could have been to get a yellow card, even a red card, and miss a match, a football match. That's it.
Yeah.
So, and it's not about holding them accountable. This is about, well, no, it is about holding them accountable for what they said they were going to do.
Mm-hmm.
To show those people who are a massive part of footballing family that we see you, we know that you need support, and we're going to give it.
Yeah.
And what we have to remember is we have a massive, massive, massive barrier already in men's football around the acceptance of gay footballers. So what then does this say to those players? I am not coming out, or it is not safe for me to come out.
Right.
And at some point, things are bigger than the football match. And like everything, like what's going to happen after this World Cup, everything will just go back to normal. If you had made that point, or I had made that point on the pitch, eventually people would have forgotten about it. Unless it made a statement, unless it was something in relation to, some of the most profound, impactful statements that have occurred over the years. The students standing in front of the trucks or the tanks in Tiananmen Square, Rosa Parks getting onto the bus, the salute at the Olympics. That's the kind of stuff that does actually have a major impact. And I think it was an opportunity for the captains to actually make a major impact by going, do you know what? Your bully tactics, your threatening tactics are exactly why we are going to do this, and then follow through with it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a much bigger statement. And there's absolutely no way in hell that FIFA would have been able to put sanctions in place for FAs, for every FA that actually stood with it.
Yeah. I agree. And honestly, the more FIFA threw the book at those countries, the bigger the story gets and the more important wearing the armband would have been.
Absolutely.
And the more solidarity that would have demonstrated. So yeah, I absolutely hear and respect that argument too. And I think that's true. I think across all of these conversations, your willingness to hold yourself accountable and hold people accountable and really stick to the principles of this is super admirable. And I think, God, when all these changes were taking place and the armband thing happened, and there was a moment where I was they just know. And I felt super small. FIFA knows that I'm going to watch this no matter what. And knows that the player's going to play no matter what. And what becomes really disheartening is that at the end of the day, as much as I can sit here and say what Infantino is saying about just stop complaining and watch the football, he was right. Not in the heart of his argument, but his bet was correct that that's what most people are going to do. Mm. If we ignore it and we push back, it'll go away. And it's not being talked about nearly as much throughout the World Cup and during games. It's not part of the coverage. There's not things going on. There's some ongoing conversations in different ways, but it is not the World Cup of protest or the World Cup of actions or the World Cup of social change that in some ways the world, the tension here could have created. Mm. So it's, yeah.
My experience is that it's the World Cup of just getting in the way of a season. It's just an inconvenience because it's got in the way of a season taking place. That's the biggest impact for the average fan.
Yeah, I don't know. I saw someone the other day, I didn't read the article, but the headline was this is one of the best World Cups they've ever watched. And that's not my experience of it, but maybe I just haven't watched as much of it as that person, or I don't understand the game as well as that person. But, I think it's just FIFA and Qatar bet that most people don't care enough about these issues to really do anything. And they correctly placed that bet. Hmm. And I think especially, that's got to be acknowledged.
Yeah. And I'll be honest with Andrew, when we were talking about what we were going to discuss, there was a part of me going, is it worth us even having a follow-on conversation about the ethics of the World Cup? Because I could imagine we may get people who might normally listen to our podcast kind of see, oh, look, another ethics podcast. Sure. Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
Is that not over with? But it is important.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's super important. I had that same thought. You know, is there going to be an appetite for this conversation, and maybe not? And then I think the other thing is like, is there going to be an appetite listening to us have this conversation? And I don't know, like, but
it hasn't stopped us.
I think, well, no, and I think it's a really important conversation because, like, I think, you know, my experience of this is like, yeah, I just agree with you. You're right. Like, they should have worn the armbands. And, like, as much as Klopp can say, hey, it's not fair, of course it's not fair. And that is so beyond the point. Like, when are any of these things fair? Like, no one gets asked, hey, is this an okay time for you to stand up for someone? That's the whole thing. It's never going to be fair. And if it's done in a way that's fair, then it doesn't make an impact. My wife's a social worker, and like her master's degree was like community organizing too. And so like when we've had conversations about this, she's always like kind of been like, Andrew, you idiot. Like, of course things have to be problematic in order for them to make a difference. Or like, you know, it has to be sort of disruptive. It has to be complicated. It can't just be like a nice conversation that creates change. And I think there was some part of me that really wanted to buy into this argument of like, this will really bring attention, and that attention will be positive, and that, you know, conversation and connection. And like, I think maybe being a therapist, right? Like, relationships create change. And it's not that people come into my office and I batter them and I say, you're wrong about this, you're wrong about this. And I sometimes have to talk to people and listen to people and be empathic when people are expressing opinions that are not super okay with me. And like, really, like, over time, it's that relationship and that connection and that like unconditional positive regard for that person that creates space for us to then disagree and have a conversation. And maybe there's some change there, but like the relationship has to come first. And I think that was what part of me thought is like, let's not run away from what this is like, let's have this as a spot to have this conversation and like have this connection and assume the best about people. And like, from there can be an exchange of views, which is a better shot at creating change than like forcible protests or disengaging. And I think like at the end of the day, I sort of feel like I don't want to say had, because like, no, I went in with my eyes wide open, but Infantino bet correctly that I wasn't going to matter and maybe stand up for what I believe in or act based consistently with my values, that the watching the football would come first.
Saying that, where does that leave you? Like, where does it leave you?
Here? What do you mean?
Within yourself. So, like, that's quite a strong statement. And don't worry, I'm not trying to move into therapeutic session here. But
no. Yeah,
I'm curious, like, where you're, like, does it make you go, Jesus, am I less of a man because the football wins out over my principles, or, anything? It didn't, Alan, until you said that.
No, I feel emasculated. No. I think it's really important to take an honest look at it. I think everything I've talked about in the lead up to this and like my thinking, I think in some ways has been in good faith, but probably a little naive, or massively naive maybe too. And like, I think at the end of it, like, it wouldn't be fair for me to sit here and say something different, I just don't think it would be fair for me to sit here and say something different. There's things I've thought about differently because of this. There's people who I've talked to, like, the guests that we've had who I've learned a ton from, conversations that we've had that have been super helpful to me. But like, this isn't the World Cup of Andrew's personal growth. That's not the point. And the people who would have benefited from my being more in line with my values, whether or not even my personal, whether it's about me, like, okay, probably like there's no one in particular who would be directly affected or like would feel a lot better, maybe, but like, you know, I don't personally matter that much, but like I think to then look at the captains and really say, you know what, they should have worn that armband. And I after your argument, and like there was a part of me that knew anyway, yeah, that's what I think. And I can't say they should have worn the armband, but I'm still going to tune in. Like they would be giving up more than me. And so how can I sit here and like throw stones at them when like I couldn't even skip a football match? So, you know, like consistency is important. I don't carry like any sort of great sense of shame or embarrassment around it. Like I don't feel like I have failed as a human because of this. Like, but I've learned something from it, I think. Maybe something about myself that isn't super pretty, but like, you know, I got some time left. I'm young. I'll work on it.
Yeah. No, it's just, you know, look, I know I kind of threw that at you, but it is about us being responsible for ourselves. And you know, when you're saying, you know, it doesn't really matter if you don't, because you don't matter in, you know, the bigger scheme of things, but you do. So I had someone very close to me have a conversation about how to them it meant something that I was not watching the World Cup because they're gay. And they said that they know that in the big scheme of things that that's not important. But for them, it was important because it showed them that somebody is with me. Someone has my back. And not that they're living in Qatar, and but they still experience oppression. You know, less so in Ireland, luckily enough, but it still happens. And that's not why I did it, but it is why I did it as well.
Yeah.
You know, so I think the argument that, and so many people have given it, and everyone has to make their own decision, but the argument that I'm just one person and it doesn't matter, that is how we are kept contained by those in power. That's what happens. You know, as soon as we all start to realize that each individual, if we do stand to our principles, we may be a lone voice for a long time, but others will find us. And we've never lived in a time where it's easier to find others who will actually join our voice. And then that becomes a collective. And then all of a sudden a collective starts a movement, and then a movement starts to influence policy. And that's when things start to change. So, and I'm not talking directly at you, Andrew, but I'm talking to people in general, that we all need to understand that it's not about, that we shouldn't diminish the little actions we have or that we put in place as being insignificant, because they're not. And we could move into a whole sphere of how, you know, energetic connections and stuff like that, you know, it's all important. So if you go into a forest and they've discovered that if you cut the roots of a tree, you know, there's a whole system underground that will send signals to the other trees that one of their own has been chopped down. And it's not on that it's a conscious thing, but it's on an energetic level. And it is important.
I don't need a VPN. I've got nothing to hide. This is what I used to tell myself before I hooked up with LibertyShield.com. Not only is my home internet now fully encrypted, but I can now access all the websites I want, whenever I want, and do so from absolutely anywhere. As a Liverpool fan, I love to know I can now watch every match, regardless of whether it's on UK TV or not. My Liberty Shield VPN makes sure nothing is blocked and guarantees me super fast streaming speed throughout that match. You can get connected right now with their software package, which includes a 48-hour no-obligation free trial and instant access to their apps for Apple, Android, Fire TV, PC, Mac, and Android TV. Or go a step further like I have and get one of their pre-configured VPN routers. These small but powerful devices allow you to easily connect every device in your home to VPN, making it the perfect solution for smart TVs, Mag boxes, and games consoles. Visit libertyshield.com today and use coupon code AIVPN25 to get 25% off at checkout.
Rosa Parks was one person.
Mm-hmm.
Nelson Mandela was one person. And they started movements that made systematic change.
Well, now I feel ashamed, Al.
I'm not trying to shame you, I swear.
I'm just making a joke, which I apologize if that cuts across the significance of what you're saying, because it is important, and I greatly admire how you've stuck to your principles here, and I think of course it matters. Like, absolutely it matters. It matters to people. I'm sure it matters to people who are listening, and I think my well-intentioned wrestling with this doesn't matter as much as real action. You know what I mean? And I think, yeah.
But maybe that's your learning. So this was your journey, that you had to go through this process of watching it so that you make different decisions in the future for you, but recognizing that you do have an impact. You are important, Andrew. Okay? Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
Really, I just wanted you to say that. Yeah, I think ultimately I would have rather have stuck to my principles around this if I could go back. We had a nice time watching England USA with some friends, but I could have gotten together with those friends and had a nice time with them anyways. And honestly, Henry was occupied elsewhere during that match, so I didn't really get to watch the match anyway. But and I think too, of course, it matters, and that from the captains it would have mattered, and there is there's a world where the captains all stuck with wearing the armbands, and there was more protests and there was more conversation, and FIFA were forced to take action, and that created a really strong, powerful message that would have meant a lot to a lot of people. And then all of a sudden, I feel like this wouldn't be the World Cup of shame. It's something else that could have been really, really powerful. And of course I could have been part of that if I had chosen to not watch. And if everyone had chosen to not watch, then which also kind of brings us, I think, to John Barnes.
Yeah.
Because there is a part of this too where saying, this is not my argument, but let me position the argument this way. It's not fair to go to someone else's country or be a guest in someone else's place and then to walk in with the moral high ground and spend your time there criticizing them. And if you're going to go be somewhere, then, my sort of upshot of John Barnes's argument is, it is your responsibility to respect their laws and respect their culture and to not criticize. And, I think there's an important part of that point, which is you also need to look at yourself and look at what's going on where you come from. And, like we've talked before, U.S. is hosting the next World Cup. And I think important reflections to be made there. It's not like the World Cup is suddenly going to the grand moral center of the universe, although there's probably people who I live around who might argue otherwise. But that becomes an important point too. So I don't know, let me kind of just kick that back over to you. Were you aware of his comments?
I was.
And what are your thoughts? And
disappointed. And the reason is, well, my counter argument to it would be, a friend invites me to their house and to stay for a few days. Very nice of them, very kind. They put me up, they feed me, and I come into the kitchen one morning and I see them slapping the head off their 10-year-old son. Should I turn my back and walk away and pretend like I saw nothing and just say, well, it's their house, so what happens in their house is okay? Absolutely not. And essentially, that's what John Barnes is trying to get us to do. No, sorry, I won't say it's what he's trying to get us to do. It's what he's saying, that that's the way things should be. And it's not the way things should be. So every single LGBTQ person in Qatar is the equivalent of a 10-year-old child, because they're so outnumbered and they're actually even worse off than a 10-year-old child. But that 10-year-old child in that house that I go to visit has no comeback. They have no safe space that they can go to. They can't escape the torment. And that's what these people are experiencing. So no, John, we absolutely shouldn't just sit back and go, oh, it's just the laws of the country. We should accept it because we're guests in their country. Absolutely not. We shouldn't. What we should be doing is pointing out or stepping in and being proactive, like any decent human being would do, would be to step in and go, that's not okay. There's got to be a different way to manage this situation where you're not beating the living daylights out of a 10-year-old child. There are other options available, and I'll happily sit down with you and explore what those other options might be. And this isn't about turning around and beating the shit out of the abuser. This is about saying there's a different way for you to manage this situation. So this is not about us going to Qatar and going, you are the worst people in the world, you should be shamed. No, it's about starting the conversation to say it doesn't have to be this way. You can manage this situation differently, where the LGBT community can feel like they have a voice. And it doesn't mean that you are not the parent and taking care of the household, but what you're doing is you're showing the 10-year-old enough respect to say, absolutely, you're an individual. Let's encourage that, because I'm secure enough in myself to know that if you live the way you want to live, that doesn't actually have an impact on my life whatsoever. So the LGBT community are not going to turn the straight Qataris gay. It's just not going to happen. So, as the theme of the pod has gone, that was a ramble, but
No.
Basically, John, I don't agree with you.
No, I think that that's very far from a ramble. I think that's a really important example and an important point about just responsibility and not turning your back on something because it's easier. And I think that's being really honest with ourselves about, am I turning my back because it's easier? Am I turning my back because I believe? No, you have to be respectful, and being respectful of your guests takes precedence over people who are being abused and tortured and oppressed. And you don't get to just turn your back and hide behind an argument that doesn't hold up. I don't think anyone's gonna argue against you there. And I think absolutely, I do think there's an important point about the Western world feeling very comfortable pointing out the moral issues of the Middle Eastern world. That when we spoke with some of our guests, that was definitely something that's come up. That's, And I think it's important to be doing both things. But like to say, pay attention to what's going on in your house. It's not perfect there, is not a reason to ignore what's going on. Like if you see something wrong and you see something like this going on, you see people being abused, like you still have to speak up. Like both of those things can reflect at the same time, or it can take place at the same time.
Well, I don't know if it's the same in the US, but like there's a legal basis for the responsibility, and we will stick with the child. So every adult has a responsibility for every child. If they see a child being abused or having to experience something like that, there is a responsibility on the adult to take care of the child. And that is across the board. It's part of the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child. You know what I mean? So we have a responsibility to support people and try and give them a voice. And there may well be, racial motives out there to some of the conversations about why Qatar has been the ones that's been pointed out. But I think that at times can be used as a cover-up or a distraction from the perspective of, well, no. I would love that, the World Cup is in every continent and that everyone was able to benefit from it. Like, absolutely. But you're mistreating a whole cohort of people for something that they have no control over. Like, it is like, Infantino being thrown into jail for having red hair. He can't do anything about that. That's just the way it is. So, if we believe that humans deserve to be treated with equality, and I know there'll be many arguments against me, but I'll happily have the conversations with anybody, but well, then we can't just sit by and not speak our truth. And it doesn't mean that we have to go and take to the streets if that's not what's right for you, but just doing the small things is important. But if any listeners are willing to go and take to the streets, you can get in touch with the likes of Outright Action International, and they will help you mobilise and try and support those LGBTQ people living in countries where they are experiencing oppression. So go and contact them and see what you can do if you are so inclined. And if you're not, that's okay too. I have no question for you, Andrew. It's just I'm feeling ranty today.
No, I think you have a lot of important things to say. And like, whether it's just the dynamic of our conversation where, the way I feel about this is very much like, yeah, I got this one wrong. And, listening to you, because these are the right arguments, which are the things I believe, and those are the things I believed 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago too. So, it's like, it's not a situation where I feel like I have a lot to say, or my jumping on in support of these arguments feels terribly genuine or in line with where I've been over the past 3 weeks. So, just hanging out in my pool of shame, waiting.
And, look, I didn't know where this pod was going to go, but I'm not sitting here in my ivory tower pointing fingers at anybody. And I hope listeners don't take that on board. That's not the purpose of the the points I'm making. The purpose is this has been my truth, and this is what I believe, and this is what I've done. And I absolutely could have done a hell of a lot more, absolutely I could have, but I haven't. So the little piece that I've done for me is what I've done, and for those around me as well, right? And if there are any listeners sitting there and they are thoroughly enjoying every single moment of this World Cup, that's okay too. We're not pointing fingers, right? We're not pointing fingers. We're just bringing this up so that we can have the conversation, and that it may or it may not have an impact on anybody, but if it makes people think about the bigger picture beyond football, and it's absolutely okay if people just go, no, I just care about the football, that's absolutely fine too. That's just what we wanted to do. We wanted to bring these discussions to your ears, and we hope you haven't broken your phone by throwing it at the wall in frustration, having listened to these conversations.
Yeah, no, that's right. And like, I think my joke about my pool of shame, or like even just, my take that, I think I got this one wrong. That's not by any means. I think everyone who watched has gotten this one wrong. Everyone's got to make up their own minds and do this their own way. That's my experience after having watched some games and taken part and had these conversations and listened to people and reflected. And that's certainly not meant to be like, we all fucking blew it.
Yeah.
Although some of us did. I think the captains did. I think whether or not we blew it, there's been opportunities missed. And so I think just being honest with myself is knowing that I think I missed an opportunity to be more consistent. And in a way that would have mattered to people.
And we got to be honest. Ultimately, FIFA blew it. Because they're the ones who've put the players, the fans, whoever else in the position of having to have these conversations, or for these conversations to take place.
I'm going to push back on you there a little bit, only because I think if we're going to say every person matters and every person's responsible, then that also implies accountability. And so, does FIFA have more accountability in this? Maybe, and probably. But also, I think it's really easy. Like, it'd be nice for me to just be like, yeah, cool, FIFA fucked up and put me in this spot to begin with. But like, I think, you don't get to do that, like, yes, it's true. But also, like, it's not fair for me to do that now and to pass this along.
No, it's not. It's not about passing the blame onto them for anybody else. But it's about holding them accountable for the decisions that they made. And that's important.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Andrew, thank you so much.
I'm not coming back.
For joining me on the Minefield podcast today.
Can we talk about sports psychology next time? So I could reduce myself a little bit.
I thought this was your best pod, to be honest.
I'm sure you enjoyed it, yeah.
But seriously though, thank you so much, and I appreciate you indulging me in the conversations, and I do apologize if I made you feel bad about yourself.
No, you didn't actually. I'm just joking, and I don't think you need to apologize or thank anyone for indulging you. You've got important things to say, and I appreciate being able to hear them, and I think I'm glad that you were able to share those as pointedly as you were this time.
Well, I appreciate it. So we will, at the next podcast, be getting back into the sports psychology in terms of maybe looking at how we think Liverpool can start to recalibrate and get back on track with players. Huh?
Liver who?
And how, players coming back can have a positive impact. And we'll get back to LFC for the next one.
Sounds good.
Excellent. All right, listeners, thank you so much for giving us your time. Hope you've enjoyed it, or at least got something from it. And until next time, look after yourselves.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at AnfieldIndex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.